Bullies slap black girl's cheek, unaware she is a deadly martial artist. Aaliyah sat at her desk in the corner of the classroom, her eyes focused on the textbook in front of her. The room was filled with the typical sounds of a high school morning, the rustling of papers, the hum of students chatting, and the soft tap of shoes on the tile floor. But Aaliyah barely noticed any of it. She was used to keeping to herself, lost in her own world where books and her martial arts training kept her company. She didn't care much for the loud, attention-seeking crowd that filled the hallways or for the gossip that circulated through the school. Aaliyah preferred silence. Her classmates had always seen her as different. While most students rushed to fit in with the popular crowd, Aaliyah took a different path. She didn't need a group of friends to define her. Her grandmother had always taught her that true strength came from within, and Aaliyah believed that more than anything. She had been training in martial arts since she could remember, a discipline that demanded focus, patience, and control. And that was just how Aaliyah lived her life, focused, patient, and in control. But today, the quiet calm of her usual routine was interrupted. Aaliyah heard the familiar sounds of high-pitched laughter echoing from the doorway. She looked up and saw the group of girls entering the classroom. Jenna, the leader of the pack, followed by her two friends, Katie and Sophie. They were always together like a trio of wolves, and they had made it clear from the start that Aaliyah was their favorite target. Here we go again, Aaliyah thought to herself as she turned her attention back to the textbook, hoping they would ignore her. But she knew better. Jenna and her friends weren't the type to leave someone alone, especially someone as quiet as Aaliyah. Jenna was the type of girl who thrived on attention, always seeking validation from others, and she had decided that Aaliyah would be the perfect person to pick on today. "Hey, look at this," Jenna's voice rang out, loud and brash. "It's the loner girl again, sitting by herself. What, no friends to hang out with, Aaliyah?" She sneered, her eyes scanning the room for an audience. Katie and Sophie giggled behind her, clearly enjoying the moment. Aaliyah didn't respond. She simply kept her eyes fixed on her book, trying to ignore them. She had learned long ago that it was best not to engage with bullies. Reacting only gave them more power, and Aaliyah knew that no matter what they said or did, they couldn't touch her. She had her martial arts, a skill that grounded her, gave her confidence, and allowed her to stay calm in difficult situations. But Jenna wasn't about to let Aaliyah's silence go unnoticed. She walked up to the desk and knocked Aaliyah's books to the floor, sending a loud thud through the room. "Oops," Jenna said with a fake innocence in her voice. "Didn't mean to do that. Are you going to cry now?" Aaliyah looked up, her calm eyes meeting Jenna's taunting gaze. The room grew quieter, the students around them waiting for Aaliyah to react. Jenna loved to make people uncomfortable, especially when she could make them squirm. But Aaliyah remained composed. She had learned to stay still, to control her emotions, even when everything inside her was telling her to fight back. Katie stepped forward, a smirk on her face. "Come on, Aaliyah, what are you going to do about it? Are you just going to sit there and let us walk all over you?" Her words were sharp, laced with mockery. Aaliyah's hand slowly reached down to pick up the fallen books. She wasn't angry, not really. She had been through this enough times to know that getting upset wouldn't help. It would only give them the satisfaction they were looking for. Instead, she stood up, straightening her back. She was taller than most of the girls in her class, and her posture always commanded attention. She wasn't afraid of them. But she didn't want to escalate the situation either. "I don't want any trouble," Aaliyah said quietly, her voice calm but firm. She knew this was the moment to assert herself, to set a boundary. "I just want to get through the day." But Jenna wasn't having it. She crossed her arms over her chest, leaning in closer. "You think you can just walk around here acting all high and mighty, don't you?" she hissed. "You think you're better than us just because you're so quiet and perfect." "You know what I think. I think you're just afraid to stand up for yourself. You're scared of me, scared of what I might do." Aaliyah took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. She could feel the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. But she refused to let them push her into a reaction. Her grandmother had taught her that in martial arts, the most important lesson wasn't about fighting, but about control over yourself and the situation. Aaliyah had trained for years to learn this, and she knew that getting into a physical altercation here in front of everyone would only make things worse. But the way Jenna was looking at her, as if daring her to do something, made Aaliyah's pulse quicken. It wasn't fear she felt, it was the desire to protect herself, to show them that they couldn't walk all over her. But Aaliyah had learned to hold her temper. She had learned to walk away from situations like this, to avoid conflict whenever possible. But Jenna wasn't going to let it go. She slapped Aaliyah's books to the floor again, this time with more force. "You don't belong here, Aaliyah," she said, her voice filled with venom. "You're not like us. You think you're special, but you're nothing." The slap echoed through the room. Aaliyah felt the sting of the insult, but she didn't flinch. She didn't allow herself to be provoked. Jenna had pushed her to the edge, but Aaliyah was determined to stay calm. She took a deep breath, trying to focus her energy. She had learned long ago that when someone tries to break you, the best thing you can do is stay strong mentally, emotionally, and physically. As the silence stretched, Aaliyah's eyes remained steady. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to fight. But she wasn't going to let Jenna get away with this either. Slowly, she bent down, her movements smooth and controlled. She picked up her books once more and looked up at Jenna. This time, her gaze was unwavering. Jenna's smug expression faltered just for a moment as she saw the determination in Aaliyah's eyes. "I'm not scared of you," Aaliyah said, her voice quiet but strong. "You don't scare me." For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in Jenna's eyes. She had expected Aaliyah to break, to cower, to beg for mercy. But instead, Aaliyah stood tall, her eyes clear and calm. It was as if the power in the room had shifted. Jenna, the one who had always been the bully, now seemed to shrink under Aaliyah's steady gaze. But Jenna quickly regained her composure, turning to her friends with a forced laugh. "Whatever," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "She's just a freak." Katie and Sophie followed her, their laughter trailing behind them as they left the classroom. But Aaliyah didn't feel the usual sting of their words. Instead, she felt a quiet strength within her, a reminder that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. As the door closed behind them, Aaliyah returned to her seat. She could hear the whispers of the other students, but she ignored them. She had learned that it didn't matter what others thought of her. What mattered was how she saw herself. And in that moment, Aaliyah felt something stronger than anger or humiliation. She felt in control. Aaliyah watched as Jenna and her friends walked out of the classroom, still laughing among themselves. The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate, but Aaliyah could still feel the stares of her classmates. They had all been watching, some with wide eyes, others with curiosity. The whispering started almost immediately. Aaliyah didn't mind. She was used to being different, used to people talking about her behind her back. She had never let it bother her, but today felt different. Today, she had stood her ground. Her fingers lightly tapped against the pages of her textbook, but she wasn't really reading anymore. The encounter with Jenna kept replaying in her mind. The way Jenna had taunted her, the way her friends had joined in, pushing her to the edge. But what really stuck in Aaliyah's mind was the slap. Not the physical sting, but the way it had made her feel, as if Jenna thought she could control her with a simple act of aggression. Aaliyah wasn't going to let that happen. She had worked too hard on herself, spent too many years learning discipline and patience to let someone like Jenna break her. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the class, Aaliyah packed her things slowly. She could feel the eyes on her as she moved, but she kept her head high. She didn't need to rush. She was calm, collected, focused. Unlike most students, she didn't mind the silence. It gave her time to think, to plan, to reflect on how she wanted to handle things next. When she stepped out into the hallway, she was immediately met with the noise of students rushing to their next class. Laughter, chatter, and the sound of footsteps filled the air. Aaliyah was in no hurry. She walked at her own pace, moving through the crowd without a second thought. But as she neared the corner, she heard it again, the unmistakable sound of Jenna's voice, followed by the laugh of her friends. "They think they're so tough," Jenna was saying, her voice carrying through the hall. "That girl, Aaliyah, she thinks she's better than everyone just because she can keep quiet. I bet she's just afraid to stand up for herself." Aaliyah stopped for a moment, just around the corner, hidden from view. Her hand instinctively gripped the strap of her backpack, but she didn't move. She wasn't angry, not anymore. But she couldn't help the frustration that bubbled inside her. Why couldn't they just leave her alone? She had done nothing to them. She hadn't asked to be their target, hadn't done anything to deserve the way they treated her. All she had ever wanted was to be left in peace. "She's not even pretty," Katie added, giggling with Sophie. "Just look at her, always walking around like she's too good for everyone." The words hit harder than Aaliyah cared to admit. She had spent most of her life training her body and mind, learning to control every movement, every reaction. She had never cared much about fitting in, about how she looked. But hearing them talk about her, judging her appearance as if it was the only thing that mattered, made something inside her stir. Aaliyah took a deep breath and shook her head. She wasn't going to let them get to her. She knew the game they were playing. Jenna and her friends weren't interested in understanding her. They were just looking for someone to push around, someone they could belittle to make themselves feel more powerful. And Aaliyah refused to be that person. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. She walked on, her footsteps steady as she moved toward the next classroom. She didn't need to hear more of their words. The sound of her own footsteps was enough to drown out their voices. As she approached the door to her next class, she saw the familiar faces of her classmates. Some greeted her with a friendly nod, while others gave her curious glances, unsure of what to make of the scene that had just unfolded in the hallway. Aaliyah smiled politely and sat down at her usual desk in the back of the room. She liked it here in the quiet corner where she could focus without being disturbed. The teacher was already preparing to start the lesson, and the students were slowly settling into their seats. But Aaliyah's mind wasn't entirely on the lesson. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. "Don't let them get to you," she whispered to herself under her breath. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "They can try to break you, but they can't touch you unless you let them." Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself. She had heard those words many times before, but today they felt different. Today, they felt like a reminder of why she had started training in the first place. Martial arts had never been about hurting others or proving strength. It had been about building resilience, finding inner peace, and learning how to face challenges without losing herself in the process. Jenna and her friends were just another challenge, one that Aaliyah would handle with the same calm focus that had carried her through every difficult moment in her life. The class began, and Aaliyah turned her attention to the teacher, trying to focus on the lesson. But she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She wasn't afraid of Jenna or her friends. No, Aaliyah was afraid of something else, something deeper. She was afraid of losing control. She was afraid that if she let her anger and frustration take over, she would become just like the bullies she despised. That was the real challenge, staying true to who she was, even when others tried to push her into a corner. As the day wore on, Aaliyah moved through her classes with a sense of calm that was almost unshakable. She didn't let the stares or the whispers distract her. She didn't engage with anyone who tried to provoke her. She focused on what mattered: her education, her training, and the peace she had worked so hard to maintain. But as the final bell rang and the students flooded out of the school, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. She had handled the situation with Jenna, but it hadn't felt like enough. She had let them go without a real confrontation, without showing them the strength she knew she had inside her. And while she didn't want to fight, she couldn't help but feel like there was a part of her that wanted to prove something, not to them, but to herself. The next day, Aaliyah arrived at school a little earlier than usual. She was walking through the courtyard when she saw Jenna and her friends gathered by the lockers. They were whispering among themselves, and when they noticed Aaliyah, they quickly fell silent. Jenna shot her a smug look, but Aaliyah didn't break her stride. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten to her. Today, she would stand tall. Today, she would be unshakable. As she walked past them, she could feel their eyes following her, but she didn't look back. Jenna could say what she wanted, but Aaliyah had nothing left to prove. She was stronger than they realized, stronger than they would ever know. And that, Aaliyah realized, was the true power. The power to stay calm, to keep moving forward, no matter how loud the world around her became. She smiled to herself as she reached her first class. Today was a new day. And this time she wouldn't let anyone take away her peace. The school day continued, but Aaliyah felt different. The events of the previous day had been weighing on her mind, and although she had kept her cool, a sense of unease lingered. She had been able to handle the situation with Jenna, but it felt like unfinished business. It wasn't about proving something to her bullies, it was about proving something to herself. Could she truly stay composed? Could she hold on to the calm she had worked so hard to build, even when faced with more provocation? As she walked through the hallways between classes, Aaliyah noticed that things felt quieter than usual. She didn't know if it was because everyone had heard about the confrontation between her and Jenna, or if it was just her own heightened awareness. But the usual noise seemed to fade as she passed by groups of students. Some looked at her curiously, others with respect, and a few with a mixture of uncertainty and wariness. But none of it bothered her. She had learned a long time ago that people would talk, people would judge. It didn't matter. What mattered was what she believed about herself. What mattered was her strength, both physical and emotional, and her ability to walk through the world without being affected by the opinions of others. However, it wasn't long before she saw them again. Jenna and her two friends, Katie and Sophie, were standing at the lockers, chatting as usual. Aaliyah had known it was only a matter of time before they would try to push her again. Jenna's gaze flicked toward Aaliyah as she approached, and she shot her a sly grin. "You're looking quiet today, Aaliyah," Jenna said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Still mad about yesterday, or are you finally realizing that you'll never be one of us?" Her friends giggled, clearly enjoying the moment. Aaliyah could feel the familiar tension rising, but she didn't react. She kept walking, her head high, her pace steady. Jenna's words didn't affect her anymore. She knew what Jenna wanted, to provoke a reaction, to make her feel small. But Aaliyah was no longer the same person she had been before. She had learned to stand tall, to not let others define her. Jenna wasn't done, though. She stepped into Aaliyah's path, blocking her way. "What's the matter, huh? Too good to talk to us. Or are you just afraid of what we might say?" she taunted. "I bet you're scared we'll spread rumors about you. That's all we need to do, right? A few words and your reputation's ruined." Aaliyah stopped, but only for a moment. Her heart didn't race. She wasn't angry. Instead, she felt something else, a quiet resolve. "You can say whatever you want," she said calmly, her voice steady and unshaken. "It doesn't change who I am." Jenna raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Aaliyah's response. She had expected her to react, to get upset, but Aaliyah wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Instead, Aaliyah simply looked at her, her expression calm, almost like she was waiting for Jenna to say something meaningful. But the longer Aaliyah stayed silent, the more awkward the situation became for Jenna. For a few seconds, it seemed like Jenna didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to being ignored. Normally, when she threw insults, people would snap back at her, or at least show some emotion. But Aaliyah wasn't playing that game. She was still calm and in control. The power was shifting, and Jenna could feel it. Finally, Jenna's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Whatever," she said dismissively, stepping aside to let Aaliyah pass. "You're boring anyway." As Aaliyah walked past her, she could hear the soft snickers from Sophie and Katie. But it didn't matter. She didn't care. She didn't need their approval, and she certainly didn't need to engage with them any more than she had to. Aaliyah had learned that there was strength in silence, in letting people talk, letting them think they had the upper hand, and then quietly walking away, secure in who you were. She continued to her next class, her mind clearer than it had been in days. The situation with Jenna had not been about defending herself physically. It had been about controlling her own mind, her own emotions. It had been about choosing not to let their words get under her skin. And for once, Aaliyah felt proud of herself for not reacting. The rest of the day passed without incident. Aaliyah focused on her lessons, her thoughts still swirling around what had happened earlier. She had stood her ground without a fight, and that was a victory in itself. It was a lesson in self-discipline, in the power of inner peace. But as the final bell rang and the students began to leave for the day, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna and her friends weren't done. She had dealt with them once, but she knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't just let it go. But this time, Aaliyah was ready. She wasn't going to let anyone push her around. That afternoon, she went straight to the gym after school. It was where she felt most at home. The echo of her footsteps against the hardwood floor, the sound of her steady breathing, the feel of her muscles moving in perfect harmony. It was all a part of her routine, a routine she had cultivated over the years. She knew that she had to keep training, keep improving. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental strength. Martial arts had taught her that. The discipline, the focus, the ability to be calm in the face of pressure, these were the things that mattered. And Aaliyah was determined to keep growing, to keep building that strength. As she stretched, preparing for her workout, Aaliyah's thoughts shifted back to Jenna and her friends. She didn't want to fight. That wasn't the answer. But she knew that she couldn't just let them push her around either. It was a fine line to walk, one that required patience and a steady mind. Aaliyah knew she was capable of handling whatever came next. She had been through challenges before, small ones, big ones. But each one had taught her something valuable. She tightened her ponytail and got to work. As her body moved through each exercise, she felt her thoughts becoming clearer, her focus sharpening. Each punch, each kick, each movement was a reminder of who she was. Aaliyah wasn't weak. She wasn't someone to be bullied. She was strong, and that strength came from within. She could handle whatever Jenna threw at her. But more importantly, she could handle whatever life threw at her. As the session came to an end, Aaliyah stood still in the middle of the gym, her breath steady. The feeling of calm that she had worked so hard to cultivate was back. Jenna and her friends could say whatever they wanted, but Aaliyah knew who she was. And no one could take that away from her. She smiled to herself, satisfied with the progress she had made. Aaliyah was stronger than ever, both in body and mind. The next morning, Aaliyah arrived at school with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent the last few hours reflecting on everything that had happened in the past couple of days. The encounter with Jenna had been frustrating, but it had also been a turning point. Aaliyah had realized that she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. What truly mattered was her own inner strength, her ability to remain calm and composed even in difficult situations. She had worked hard to build that strength, and no one, not even Jenna, could take that away from her. As she walked through the front doors of the school, Aaliyah felt a sense of determination wash over her. She knew that she couldn't control how others treated her, but she could control how she responded. She wasn't going to let anyone drag her down or make her feel less than she was. She had a mission now, to continue walking her path with confidence and grace, no matter what obstacles came her way. The halls were buzzing with the usual sounds of students chatting and laughing. Aaliyah moved through the crowd with ease, her gaze steady and her posture straight. She didn't rush or try to avoid the whispers that followed her every step. Instead, she walked confidently, knowing that she had nothing to hide. She didn't need to be part of the popular crowd. She didn't need anyone's approval. She was enough just as she was. But as she rounded the corner, she saw them again. Jenna and her friends. This time they were standing by the lockers as if waiting for her. Aaliyah's heart didn't race and her body didn't tense up. She had been prepared for this moment. Jenna had already tried to bully her once, and Aaliyah had kept her cool. Now she had a choice. She could keep walking past them, ignoring their taunts, or she could stand her ground and make it clear that she wasn't going to be intimidated. Jenna was the first to speak, her voice loud enough for Aaliyah to hear. "Well, look who it is," she said with a smirk. "The silent, invisible girl. What's it like being so perfect, Aaliyah? Do you even know how to talk to people?" Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had heard these words before, and they didn't affect her. Jenna wanted her to react, to get upset. But Aaliyah wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. Instead, she looked at Jenna calmly and took a slow step forward, making it clear that she wasn't going to back down. "I'm not perfect," Aaliyah said softly. "But I'm comfortable with who I am. You don't have to like me, but I'm not going to change just because you think I should." For a moment, Jenna was silent, her expression changing slightly as she processed Aaliyah's words. It wasn't what she had expected. Jenna was used to getting a reaction, a snappy comeback, a fight, something. But Aaliyah wasn't playing by her rules. She was speaking her truth, and Jenna didn't know how to respond. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" Sophie piped up from behind Jenna, trying to add to the pressure. "You think you're special because you can keep your mouth shut. That doesn't make you better. It just makes you weird." Aaliyah didn't look at Sophie. She kept her eyes on Jenna, her voice steady. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," she said calmly. "I just think that I don't need to be loud to be heard. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I'm okay with being me." Jenna's face twisted in frustration. She had expected Aaliyah to fold under pressure, to be embarrassed, to show weakness. But Aaliyah wasn't showing any of that. Instead, she was standing tall, her presence almost like a quiet force. It made Jenna uneasy, and she didn't like feeling that way. Katie, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and crossed her arms. "You really think you're just going to walk around here acting like you're better than everyone else?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It doesn't matter how quiet you are. You can't hide forever, you know. We're still going to make sure everyone knows who you really are." Aaliyah took a deep breath, holding her ground. "You can say whatever you want about me," she said softly, "but it doesn't change who I am. And no matter how hard you try, you can't make me feel small." The words hung in the air for a moment, and the tension between them grew thicker. Jenna, Katie, and Sophie were standing there, their faces hardening, but Aaliyah stood there calmly, not backing down. She could see the frustration in their eyes, but she didn't feel the need to react. There was no need for more words, no need for confrontation. Aaliyah turned to walk past them, her footsteps steady, but as she did, she heard Jenna's voice once more. "You're going to regret this," Jenna called out, her voice filled with venom. "You can't just ignore us forever. We'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Aaliyah didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say. Instead, she continued walking down the hall, her heart calm and her mind focused. The day was just beginning, and she had no intention of letting anyone derail her. As the day went on, Aaliyah felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt before. She was no longer afraid of Jenna or her friends. She wasn't afraid of their words or their taunts. She had already shown them that she wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, to walk away from the drama and the negativity. And that was all she needed to do. She didn't need to engage in their games. She didn't need to prove anything to them. But as she sat in her last class of the day, Aaliyah realized something important. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, who had ever been pushed around or ignored. Aaliyah knew she had a voice, and she knew how to use it not by yelling or fighting, but by standing firm in who she was. And that was a powerful thing. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Aaliyah gathered her things and stood up, ready to leave. She passed by Jenna and her friends one last time, but this time there was no tension. They didn't say anything, and Aaliyah didn't look back. She had already won. She had proven that she wasn't someone who could be pushed around. She was stronger than that. As Aaliyah stepped out of the school and into the quiet afternoon, she felt a sense of satisfaction. She didn't need to fight. She didn't need to prove herself. She had already done what mattered most. She had stayed true to herself. And in that moment, that was enough. The next few days felt different for Aaliyah. Something had shifted, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The confrontation with Jenna and her friends hadn't just been a moment of standing up for herself. It had been a realization. Aaliyah had always known she was strong, but now, more than ever, she felt certain of it. She didn't need to fight or argue with anyone to prove her worth. Her calm, her self-control, and her ability to remain composed in the face of adversity were enough. She didn't have to be like everyone else to be seen. As the school week went on, Aaliyah found herself in a new rhythm. She was more focused than ever. The whispers and stares from her classmates no longer bothered her. In fact, they seemed to fade into the background as she focused on what really mattered to her: her studies, her training, and her peace of mind. Every step she took was one toward her goal of becoming the best version of herself. Her interactions with her classmates were becoming easier, too. She noticed some of the students who had once ignored her or treated her as an outsider now offering small nods of acknowledgement. A few even greeted her with a warm smile. Aaliyah didn't need a crowd of friends. She didn't need to fit into a mold, but she could see that there was a quiet respect building around her, and that felt good. One afternoon, as Aaliyah was walking to the gym after school, she ran into someone unexpected. It was Eli, a quiet boy in her history class. He had always been friendly to her, but they had never really talked much outside of class. Eli was standing by the door holding a basketball and looking a little lost in thought. "Hey, Aaliyah," he said almost nervously. "Got a minute?" Aaliyah smiled and nodded. "Sure, what's up?" Eli hesitated for a second, then spoke up. "I just wanted to say I saw what happened the other day with Jenna. You handled it really well. I think a lot of people were surprised. But honestly, I think you've got a lot of strength, more than people realize." Aaliyah was taken aback. She hadn't expected anyone to really notice. Most of the time, people just watched from a distance, but Eli had paid attention. His words were genuine, and it made her feel seen. Not in a way that she needed validation, but in a way that showed her that her strength wasn't invisible. "Thanks, Eli," she said with a soft smile. "I appreciate that. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I don't like to draw attention." Eli nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I get that. But sometimes it's not about drawing attention. It's about letting people know you're not someone to be messed with. And well, I think you did that." Aaliyah looked at Eli for a moment. He wasn't the type to give compliments lightly, and she could tell that his words were sincere. It felt good to know that someone noticed, but more than that, it felt good to know that she hadn't needed to prove anything. Her actions spoke for themselves. "I guess sometimes you have to show people that you won't back down, but in your own way," Aaliyah replied. "I don't need to be like everyone else, and I don't need to fight to be respected. But that doesn't mean I won't stand up for myself if I have to." Eli gave her a small grin. "You've definitely got that figured out." They stood there for a moment, the sound of students walking by filling the air. Then Eli cleared his throat. Well, I'll let you get to practice. I just wanted to say that. And if you ever want to shoot some hoops sometime, let me know. Aaliyah nodded. Thanks, Eli. Maybe I will. As she walked past him, she couldn't help but feel a little lighter. It wasn't just Eli's words that had made her feel good. It was the fact that she had handled everything with grace. Jenna and her friends had tried to push her down, but they hadn't succeeded. Aaliyah had remained true to herself, and that felt like the real victory. The next day, as Aaliyah entered the gym for her usual workout, she felt an unexpected sense of calm. She had learned so much over the past few days, not just about how to deal with others, but about herself. She realized that she had been carrying around a lot of unspoken fears, fears about fitting in and being accepted, fears about being judged. But she had learned that she didn't have to fit into anyone's mold. She was enough just as she was. Her grandmother's teachings echoed in her mind. Strength comes from within, and peace is something you create for yourself. No one can take that away from you unless you let them. Aaliyah smiled to herself as she began stretching, feeling the familiar rhythm of her movements. Her body was strong, but more importantly, her mind was strong. She had learned that true strength wasn't about fighting others or proving something. It was about the ability to remain calm in the face of chaos, to stand firm in who you were, no matter what the world threw at you. The gym was almost empty, and Aaliyah took the opportunity to practice some of the new techniques she had been working on. She moved through her exercises with ease, her body fluid and controlled. The sound of her breathing was steady, and her focus was sharp. Every punch, every kick, every movement felt like a reminder that she was capable, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. As she finished her workout and walked toward the locker room, Aaliyah's thoughts shifted again, this time to the future. She had no idea what was ahead, but she felt ready. Ready for whatever challenges life might throw her way because she knew she could handle them. She didn't need to fight or argue to prove herself. Her strength came from within, and that was all she needed. When Aaliyah walked out of the gym, she felt different. She wasn't walking with her head down anymore, avoiding the crowds or the whispers. She was walking with confidence, her shoulders squared, her steps steady. She had learned that the world would always have people like Jenna, people who wanted to bring others down to feel better about themselves. But Aaliyah also knew that those people didn't define her. She was stronger than she had ever realized, not because of her physical strength, but because of her ability to remain true to herself. And in that moment, Aaliyah knew that she had won. Not because she had defeated anyone, but because she had overcome her own doubts and fears. She had found her peace, and no one could take that from her. As the day came to an end, Aaliyah walked out of the school building, the warm afternoon sun shining down on her. For the first time in a long time, she felt completely at ease. There was no drama, no fear, no need to prove anything. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and that was enough. Aaliyah had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength wasn't about defeating others. It was about having the courage to stand tall and remain true to who you were, no matter what. And that was a power that no one could ever take away from her.